Good morning this morning. How are you this morning? Just looking through the news, found a great piece called The Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. I'm glad to see that people are starting to wake up to where Lemon Sour has been, where I've been, that the Monroe Doctrine is being revised right now by President Donald Trump. That he sees the big picture. He sees the big picture. And that things are going to change. Things are going to change. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe, and we're going to get a little bit into this. We don't want to go through the whole article. It is huge. I'll, of course, link it. It's a great article. It basically goes through the history of the Monroe Doctrine itself. Its initial founding, its implementation, its use over the years. It cites an example by President Theodore Roosevelt of parking a warship in the Dominican Republic to ward off European warships from collecting debts that they had owed from a loan, and had appointed an American customs agent to distribute revenue to their debtors, to their creditors, so they paid off their loan without them coming in and grabbing the Dominican Republic, which has been the biggest fear and is the main point of the Monroe Doctrine. But as it relates to Trump, he's jesting, one hopes. His musings about Greenland and the Panama Canal are more serious matter. He broached a purchase of Greenland from Denmark while declining to rule out military seizure of the island. There would be a strategic logic to such a move. Greenland fronts on the Arctic, an emerging theater of strategic competition, while abutting the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, Russia's access to the North Atlantic. It abounds in critical minerals. China has been nosing around for mineral rights along with other activities as a self-proclaimed near-Arctic state. And then there's the Panama Canal. Shutting the canal in times of war would compel the U.S. maritime forces to default to much longer, more time-consuming, more arduous voyages to swing around the oceans. U.S. control would hold that prospect at bay. Control of the two sides would bolster strategic defense of the Americas. We cannot have the possibility. Of course, our aircraft carriers can't go through the Panama Canal as currently constructed. That could be something that we did in the future, a lock specifically designed for that, but they would have to go around South America from North America to get to the west coast of the United States, no less to be active in the Pacific region. Or vice versa. That can't happen. I think the Panama Canal is more real than people think. I think there's a legitimate chance that if we don't get basing rights or serious concessions the president wants, that military intervention is a possibility. I think that's far, far less the case in Greenland. Greenland has already shown that their people want to be independent from Denmark. If they want to be independent from Denmark, as far as I'm concerned, that's almost as good, because then we can negotiate with them on equal footing, and I'm sure that the president would be able to get basing rights and mineral rights and be able to keep the Chinese out, because as they constrict the global supply of rare earth minerals in the Eastern Hemisphere, we have to be able to open supplies in the Western Hemisphere. And as the president builds the Trump Monroe Doctrine and creates those walls, those economic and military walls around our hemisphere to secure us from economic invasion, immigrant invasion, And yes, even military invasion, because that is the era we're looking for, we are in. This article speaks specifically about the Chinese getting 2 Peruvian ports. Yeah, that's in Peru. That's all the way down in Peru. That's in the Western Hemisphere. I'm trying to look. This is an enormous article. Okay. Here it is. China has pursued commercial access to seaports all around the world's inlands, often garnering notable success. Not long ago, for example, Xi Jinping traveled to South America to inaugurate a Chinese bankrolled container port at Chonsi along the Peruvian seacoast. China made inroads in the Western Hemisphere not by bombast or by sending People's Liberation Army Navy to collect debts, but by appealing to the self-interest of Latin American state. Xi wooed Peruvian leaders, promising to further the two countries' interest well-being through seagoing, trade, and commerce. Belt and Road. Their Belt and Road initiative has been global. I'll never forget watching Top Gear. I think it was Top Gear. And they were doing their African tour, and they went from one country to another. I forget the countries, but one had these beautiful roads, wonderful roads. Across the border immediately, the roads were just garbage, absolute garbage. And then they found out that country had been part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and China had come in and laid all their roads. Wasn't the army that did it. They did it. This is the kind of thing that we need to do. If the Monroe Doctrine is going to work, if the Monroe Doctrine is going to work, and I think it will, if the Trump Monroe Doctrine is going to work, it has to be more belt and road than belt and whip. The nature of the current strategic competition then suggests that Trump will need to craft a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine radically different from Roosevelt's. It will depend on consent from fellow American governments. U.S. diplomats will need to convince their regional counterparts that intentions can change on a dime. In other words, China is not a partner pursuing agreements for mutual, apolitical economic gain. It is pursuing power, including forward-deployed military power. Covenants guaranteeing mercantile access could morph into something altogether more sinister and at its discretion or even the whim of Beijing. In short, Washington must pursue governments that throughout the Americas that the risks of intimacy with China outweigh the benefits. And to go with diplomatic outreach, the dealmaker-in-chief must offer economic, diplomatic, military inducements to bandwagon with the United States. Just as I said, more belt and road than belt and whip. That has to be approached with a lot of these countries. Some will need the belt and whip. I can think of 2 right now that are going to need the belt and whip. One, hopefully, there's been backdoor channels, and I did a story about this previously a couple months ago, between the United States and Venezuela. If not, they may need the whip. Also, this policy has not really been clarified yet. We know more about our policy with Mexico, which I'm glad of. They're clearly our number one economic concern in this area. So it's good to know that our policy is pretty solid there, and might be tariffs incoming here in 8 days with Mexico. But Cuba. This is why I think Marco Rubio is Secretary of State, is for the Trump Monroe Doctrine, for the solidification of the Western Hemisphere, minerals, resources, governments, peoples. Because China and BRICS, Russia and China, are creating their thing over on the Eastern Hemisphere, We need to secure the Western. This, I believe, is Trump's goal. I support it 100%. We'll take military interventions on a case-by-case basis. Hopefully there aren't any. If there are, well, we'll see if there's an actual exit plan and if it's brief and whatever. I do think the whip will be needed a couple of times. I don't think we're invading Venezuela. I don't think we're invading Mexico. But like I said in yesterday's video, we just declared the Mexican drug cartels state sponsors of terrorism. That opens them up to the global war on terror. There's all kinds of laws in there that people need to pay attention to. This is how come Obama went on his drone campaign around the world, because he was legally justified to do so by the Global War on Terror authorization of 2001. We just put them there. I could see other countries seeing that same thing. It could be hairy, but like this article says, the deal maker in chief wants to make a deal. He wants to make a deal. And I think that most will fall in line. I think eventually we will see a free Cuba. I think that there's a deal to be made there. I think Trump will make a deal with Cuba too. We've got to secure the Western Hemisphere. That is the goal of the Trump Monroe Doctrine. You can see it take shape. I'm glad to see the rest of the media is actually starting to see this. It's as obvious as the nose on your face if you know anything about history. The one thing this article doesn't cover is that Jack Kennedy, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, specifically cited the Monroe Doctrine as one of the specific reasons that the missiles had to be out of Cuba, because it was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. There's been many times the United States has utilized the Monroe Doctrine to its benefit. A Trump corollary, as they call it in this article, I think that's fair. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And we're just going to leave right here because can you not love the picture of Battleship New Jersey just looking so beautiful? I mean, come on, baby. Whew, America. That can fit through the Panama Canal. Just saying. Thank you for swinging in, listening to me. I don't want to turn the picture off, so we're just going to leave it right here. I appreciate you. Thank you.